Recording.
Oh, you logged in as me?
No.
Yeah, you're logged in with my account.
Oh.
It's all right. Click share video.
I just mute my phone now.
Yeah.
Hello.
You're on now.
Hello.
Oh, yeah. For some reason, I'm on Zach's user thing, but hey.
It's okay. Hello, Zach. No problem.
Deb, how you doing?
I'm
Sorry.
okay. We're just saying hello anyway, and I'm just saying thanks for joining me. So it's great to have you here as well.
Right.
Just going to mute your mic. Okay. So I think we've started recording now. And if I go back to okay, so you should now be able to see some pictures of me and Dad, past and present. Well, not really present, considering I got married 10 years ago, and the front cover of the book. If you can't see it, here it is in the flesh. Before we get going, I just want to make sure I say my thank yous, because I'm not very good at remembering to do that when I'm nervous and I start wittering on. So thank you very much to Sarah from V Press for publishing these poems, especially as for a long, long time I didn't actually believe that this was poetry and became really insecure about it. So thanks for sticking with me, Sarah, and thanks for your diligent and conscientious approach to the editing. I appreciated that. Thanks to Spaz and Des, who we're going to hear from later on. I really appreciate your time and contribution. I'm hoping that we'll have a little bit of time at the end to chat, and you know, if you want to ask me any questions or you know whatever, then please do so. If you think of anything whilst I'm wittering on, just put it in the chat and I'll come back to it at the end. So I'm going to start with a little bit of context because I think that's important, especially for the collection. So hopefully you can see these photos, and I'm sorry that the table is quite small, but I'm not you know, this isn't a lesson. I'm not expecting you to read the table. But I'm very grateful of some local historians who have helped me really in the process of researching the pamphlet, helped me to understand and flesh out the nearly 100-year history of the Longbridge car factory. And I think, as most of you already know, this is a collection of poems that is informed by that social manufacturing history and by my family's personal connection. So, you know, family history as well. So what I tried to do with this pamphlet is to bring together in an experimental hybrid way my family's experiences and memories of the car factory and the social history and some of the social documents that are also linked to the factory, to try and write a pamphlet of poems that explored working class identities, working class places, themes of family and duty, and how those things intersect and interact with each other. So I began in the first instance by interviewing my dad, who worked at Rover Longbridge for 36 years from the age of 15. He did enjoy writing. In fact, he decided at 17 that he was going to be a writer. But he chose to stay at the factory and continued to work there. And that's not to say he didn't love his job. He did love his job. So I've integrated aspects of his memoir, written in his own idiolect, into the poems as a tribute to that factory experience, but also, I guess, as a tribute to my dad, who I, you know, worship and adore, if you hadn't already guessed. But also as a way of trying to harness and capture the importance and the significance of that factory to a whole community of people, to a town of people. But, you know, Longbridge touched so many more people in the wider Birmingham region, in the wider West Midlands region, And at the time of its closure, it had over 6,000 employees. Okay, so what I wanted to do is make a collection of poems that encapsulated and memorialized some of those experiences, and also as a way of capturing it for my dad as well, and validating those experiences. We're talking about a factory that had a close to 100-year history. And I guess at the time of thinking about writing these poems, I was struggling a little bit with all the regeneration marketing material that was coming out of New Longbridge, which seemed, to my mind, almost erase 100 years worth of history. You know, yes, it's a very nice new town centre. It's a leisure and shopping destination now. But I think it's very important to try and record everything that went on there before Marks and Spencer's. So Dad's memories in the first person accounts are juxtaposed in some of the poems with elements of those marketing materials. You know, I've used the marketing materials from St Modwin, the regeneration specialists, experts, and tried to collage it really with my own family experiences and our own feelings towards the factory and the Longbridge plant. If you've read some of the poems, or you've read some of the sample poems, you might also have realised that there are quite a lot of allusions in there to William Wordsworth. And that is because William Wordsworth was the first poet I loved and adored. Why? Because it was Dad who gave me my first ever poetry book, and it was Wordsworth collected poems. That was at about age 7, and from then on I wanted to be a poet. That was it. As I said to you, I idolise my dad, and I think that relationship has defined everything I do. The way I perceive my family, my marriage, the concept of fatherhood, the concept of childhood, but also, as I say, who I wanted to be as a professional. As I said, we're going to hear later on from Spaz and Deb, and the reason I invited people to take part in this launch is because I really wanted to capture other people's experiences. It's all right me saying, oh, this factory touched a lot of people's lives, but it's only me talking and it's only our family history that you're hearing. So I'm really grateful to both of them for taking the time to dip into their own personal history and their own personal connection with the factory, and we'll come back to that later. I think that that will be important for this launch, to try and give you a sense, as I say, of the widespread sort of connection that people in this area felt with that factory. Thank you for the people sending me nice supportive messages. Okay, so as I said, you can see some of the overview here in this table of the factory history. And as I said, I worked with some local historians. And this table, this overview of the near 100-year history, was provided by Gillian Bardsley. Gillian works for the British Motor Museum. She's an archivist there, and her speciality is social and motor car history. And she's got a book, this book, okay, Making Cars at Longbridge, 1905 to the present day. And some of the images you'll see in the presentation and throughout tonight come from her book. So she was really helpful at helping fill out some of the 100-year history for me. And like I say, I'm not going to go through all of it, but I think some of the significant moments that you should probably be aware of is that this wasn't just a car factory. This was a factory that contributed and played a significant part in 2 world wars. It was responsible for innovations in manufacturing, car manufacturing, in terms of developing innovations in processes, practices and products. over that near 100-year history, of course, changed shape in terms of scale and size. It changed name. My dad started to work there in 1969, so he saw a variety of the most iconic Longbridge cars made and produced there, including the Mini again in the 60s, the Allegro, which was launched in the 70s, the Metro in the 80s. My first car was a Rover 25, and obviously we saw it, our family saw it right till the closure in 2005. Another historian that I was grateful to was Clarissa Barclay, who actually still lives in the Long area, grew up there, and both her great-grandfather and father worked at Longbridge. She is a Birmingham University graduate, and she currently works for Birmingham Museums Trust at the think tank Science Museum. And hopefully, fingers crossed, if the technology works, I'm now going to take you to a video that Clarissa has prepared, which integrates some of the social history of the car factory with some of her own personal family history. So give me a moment, and like I say, keep your fingers crossed that this works. People see that. Can you see Clarissa's face? Yay! Okay. So I'm going to play the video now, and it's just shy of 10 minutes long, okay?
Hello, I'm Clarissa and I have lived in Longbridge, very near to the Long plant for all my life. My dad worked there and my great-granddad worked there, so I really have first-hand experience of seeing the effects the plant had on the entire local community, both positively when the plant was open and the changes that happened after the plant's demise. Being the amateur historian that I am, I really am fascinated with the local history of the site and Longbridge as a whole, which was built up because of the works in a similar way to how Cadbury built Bourneville. Working in the museum industry in Birmingham, I have had the chance to research the plant in quite a bit of detail, and I personally am most interested with the social history and the workers themselves, and it makes me very proud to come from a place that has such deep roots in industry and to live in an area that has become a symbol for the rise of local car manufacturing in the UK. One of my favourite things about Longbridge is the massive part it played in wartime production. So in the First World War and the Second World War, all usual car production ceased and efforts turned towards munition productions. In World War I, 8 million shells, 650 guns, 2,000 trucks and 2,500 aero engines were all produced at Longbridge. And in World War II, 3,000 aircraft were produced, including most notably the famous Hawker Hurricane, which museums in Birmingham still have models of, so that's lovely to see. And while the factory itself can't be missed on the landscape because it was huge, its influence didn't end there. Herbert Austin, the founder and builder of the Austin Motor Company in Longbridge, established the Austin Village in 1917 to house the quickly growing workforce. That housed around 2,000 workers and still stands today. So in 1999 it achieved conservation status, so that really highlights its historical significance. And to mark its centenary in 2017, a huge street party was held whereby all the locals came out to celebrate where they live, and it was really special to see that, because even though the plant closed a while ago and doesn't directly affect us anymore, everyone is still really proud of their roots and wanted to celebrate that, so that was lovely. But aside from all that, my other favourite thing about Longbridge are all the stories that my dad has from when he worked there. As I said earlier, my great-granddad worked there too, but sadly I never got the chance to meet him, so all of his stories will go untold. The only thing I do know from my granddad, his son, is that he worked there during the famous Fred Robbo strikes. Just some background, Derek Robinson led over 500 walkouts of the British Leylands at the time, which would have cost an estimated £250 £200 million in lost production before he was sacked in '79. And apparently my great-granddad was part of all those protests in Cofton Park, so I'm sure he would have had some fascinating stories to tell, but sadly I don't have access to those anymore. Dad, on the other hand, has lots of stories, and he's told me all about his time working at Rover. He started working for Rover in 1995 and left in 2003, just a couple of years before it closed. He held lots of different roles, the first being working on engine subframes for the MG sports car. He also worked on the Mini and the Rover 25. On his first day, the machine that he was working on had supposedly never broken down in years, but within the first 30 minutes of him working on it, it broke. So whether that was a sign of things to come, I don't know. That's what he thinks. He told me it was a very difficult job, and has actually given him permanent hearing problems just because the noise of a production line is so loud all of the time. He's gone a little bit deaf now. And it also has given him nightmares, which he still has. Mainly worrying about not finishing his job on the production line and getting stuck too far down the tracks and struggling to get back to his section. I guess that's just the pressure of working on a production line. But he does say the worst thing about it was trying to find cover for toilet breaks because they could not leave without someone replacing them. So it can't have been that bad. It definitely wasn't all doom and gloom. He has lots of stories about the pranks they used to play on each other. My favourite being the time my dad's line manager left his watch line around and one of the team changed the time so that the shift ended way before it should have done, and it wasn't even them that got into trouble. The line manager took the hit for having sent them home too early, so that was nice of him. And despite being quite an antisocial job, physically working there because there was so much to concentrate on and any errors could be costly, they saw a completely different side to each other outside of work. So a lot of their lunch breaks were spent at Cofton Park playing football together. My dad was part of the Rover five-a-side. He even made it to the finals, which he's very proud of. Rover offered lots of extensive benefits in a similar way to Cadbury. So the Rover gym was free and Dad used to spend lots of time working out with all his friends. There was the Austin Social Club. He remembers breaking a karaoke system, singing Billy Idol's White Wedding, so that must have been a good night. But his favourite part about the job was definitely the team. He says it was very diverse, young, old, different races, cultures, and they were all very proud to work there, so proud to wear their uniform. It made them feel like they were part of something important, which of course they were. It was readily recognised in the community. Rover used to organise team building days where they used to go to Skern Lodge in Appledore, and it really caused them to become great friends rather than just colleagues. That's one of his main memories that he's taken away. One of the benefits that affected my whole family was the ACOP scheme, whereby members of Rover or their relatives could get a brand new car for a heavily reduced price, just deducted from the wages each week. So we got a brand new Rover 25 and my mum still says that it's her favourite car that she's ever owned. They also, Rover paid £600 a year to each worker to go towards any educational or training scheme. So my dad used it to go to Open University for 2 years, which is an opportunity he would never have had otherwise, but they could also learn to drive or drive a forklift, so that was a fantastic opportunity for them. He's got his fair share of gory stories too. A factory is definitely a dangerous place to work, as proven by his friend who had a couple fingers torn off holding a air compressor gun too close to the edge, and my dad still has this on his thumb from where he accidentally drilled through it once, so that's not very pleasant. But when it came to the plant actually closing down, even though my dad had left 2 years prior before everything completely closed, he still felt really great sadness at the loss of the works and sadness for all his friends and the men that still work there. Everything around here just became silent. when my dad was a boy living in Turfs Green, he used to be able to hear the bull, as they called it, from his bedroom, which turned out to be the shift change bell. Obviously, he didn't know that at the time. And all that usual factory noise that was constantly ongoing just completely ceased. It was all just gone. It was a real shame to watch each building come down one by one, because we live really nearby, so it was a shame to see that. My whole family actually attended the Rover Rally March that in 2000 that marched through Birmingham city centre, and tens of thousands of people came. Apparently almost 50,000 people, all to protest the closure of Rover. I was in a pushchair at the time, but me and my siblings were all holding placards saying "Save my dad's job." So obviously it didn't work, but it was a nice effort. It was a very sad end to an amazing era. The whole community had benefited from Rover in that hungry workers on their lunch breaks funded sandwich shops and chip shops, and all that business just left. When Rover closed, there was so less money. We all felt the change, and for a while the area seemed pretty desolate, just massive areas of empty land where the factories once stood. Now, of course, we have the Longbridge Town Centre, so all that business has come back, but I think all the locals will always remember what it used to be like, and I personally am really glad that I have all my family stories to remember it by.
Okay, can you see me again now? Did it work? Some people are nodding, yay! Right, I'm just going to put some photos back up. Hopefully that works. Okay, so I'm really grateful to Clarissa for having made that video for me, because it really encapsulated what I thought about the factory, that this wasn't just a factory that had touched my family, but this was a factory that had touched so many families and generations of families. And as I watched her video, and since we've had our exchanges, there were so many striking echoes between what my dad had told me about the factory and what she said her great-grandfather and her father had experienced. And it was touching for me to hear some of what she said, also encapsulated in some of the poems in the pamphlet. So I felt validated almost in that I had been able to record some of the factory's history, and hopefully memorialise some of that significance and the importance that it had, the resonance that it had with so many families. As Clarissa said, the workers of Longbridge were proud to work there, and many generations, as I said, of families had worked there. And I'm showing you photos now of members of my family. So in the top left corner, that's my grandfather there, Doug Wareham, my dad's dad, who worked at Longbridge. And then if you can see the black and white photo of the 5 children, my dad was the youngest of 5 siblings. So he's the slightly slouched little baby there. But his second oldest brother, Michael Phillip, who's the second from the left in the photo, he also worked at the factory. And I felt that family history and family legacy and generations of family connections was important to also try and encapsulate in the poems, because a lot of men went to work in this factory because their brothers did, because their fathers did, because their grandfathers did, and they were proud to be following in the footsteps of their older siblings and of their fathers. And it was also an important part of who they were in developing their own identity and growing up, not only in their own family, but growing up surrounded by a factory family and learning what it meant to have a place and have a role in a factory where everybody did play a very significant part in order to keep it going. And so I think I've tried to draw on that experience, particularly in the poems Internal Vacancy, Sod's Law and I Wandered Lonely, which are some of the poems that are written in my dad's idiolect and are directly taken from those initial interviews. As I say, there were a lot of echoes in what Clarissa said and what my dad had said. You know, the gory stories. My granddad lost his eye whilst working in the factory, and that's mentioned in the poem in the pamphlet Sod's Law. And my dad also told lots of wonderful stories about all the tricks they used to play on each other and all the games they used to have, and all the fun they used to have teasing the supervisors. So moving on then to talk about the everyday life of working in the factory. And again, another thing that Clarissa mentioned was the sound of the factory. And that was something that my dad mentioned quite a lot to me and was really significant for him because my dad was deaf, deaf in one ear. And the sound of the factory for him was very, very significant and overwhelming and intimidating, because it meant he couldn't hear anybody. All he could hear was the sound of the factory. And as Clarissa mentioned, these sounds were very significant for the whole community because, if you like, it was almost the heartbeat of the factory and the heartbeat of Longbridge as a town and a community. But as I say, this is something that my dad struggled to adjust to because not being able to hear made him feel very isolated. And you've got to remember he was also only 15. And the size, the scale, the sound of the factory, which to him at 15 seemed indestructible and intimidating, really made him feel isolated, I guess, at that time. And that's what the poem Noise is about. Obviously, as Dad settled in and learned how to live in a factory and to develop his own place within the factory, I guess, his job role developed. And again, drawing on what Clarissa said, he told me many stories about the pressures that he was under to keep the track moving and to keep it going. And that's where I'm going to start with some of the poems from the pamphlet. So I'm going to start by reading Metro. Metro. I saw one yesterday. A little blue one whizzed by, and I was at the top of Rose Hill near Lickey, and I imagined it was fresh off the track. Another one leaping down the assembly to cab in West Works. How exciting. It had its own will to be alive, and it had made a dash for the gates and would keep on going. Nippy number with new tech. Folding seats with a bee's knees. Didn't you have a red one? 96 cars an hour at its peak, and you couldn't stop production. Had to keep them whizzing by. Chaps collapsed on the track having heart attacks. Had to get men working on the track next to the ambulance just to keep it going, and another one whizzing. The government sent a right bastard to shake them up. He'd get pissed at the hare and hounds, sleep it off, and then go down. If they'd lost a few jobs, he'd go fucking mental. Sack them, and the night shift became the day shift just to make it up and keep them going. Keep them whizzing. They'd be there till midday, but if you went home there was no coming back. You'd go into the production meeting because the others bottled it. You couldn't say it would stop. It would never stop. And if you said it wouldn't and it did, you were on the chopping block. They thought you were great because you kept it going, kept it whizzing, even when it was grim, even when it was tight. Another poem now about the pressures of working in a factory. Thank you, Deb. Pressure. When you tell me they built the painted body store and 3 new high-tech tracks up in the air at the top of Heart Attack Hill, you look excited. You say you don't remember, but you do. And the joy and pain still runs through a niggling root that cannot be killed, like a Japanese knotweed that spreads when you're not looking. You talk about driving in, the big building next to the tunnel, and you are proud to say that no car factory had this, not even in Europe. A computerized system that you could put into auto. You wouldn't do nothing and the cars would come out and onto the track. But it didn't work like that. At Rover, it seems there was 1 step forward and 2 steps back, and for you it was a lifetime's leap, then dragged 36 back. Too many constraints in the factory, shortage of engines, trim, everything. And the constraints on you that you manufactured via duty. Constraints that became so big that the computer went kaput and wouldn't bring anything out. You say you could never live in automatic, but you had already written your program. You say this store was the dog's bollocks, but it didn't marry up with what they wanted to build. What did they build when they made you? You say at its peak it was 96 cars an hour, 3 trim tracks, and cars couldn't have anything missing. But they couldn't keep up, so they did have stuff missing and it couldn't keep up, but you couldn't stop production, and what was missing was you trapped in the trim tracks, and it didn't marry up with what was meant to be built. And you the dog's bollocks because you kept it going, but there was stuff that was missing and you wanted to build, but you didn't stop the track. And all of the constraints meant you kept the track going, and at its peak you passed the Wordsworth to me, and I began wandering down a track made of hills and vales and covered in daffodils, and you couldn't keep up with what I wanted to build. You couldn't stop the track, but I could never live in auto. Okay. Thank you everyone. And I'm going to move now to talk about pressure of a different kind. Thank you. Family pressure. Pressure maybe to suppress your innermost dreams and ambitions because you'd got a stable job at a factory. It was good money for a young man. And then later on you find you've got a mortgage to pay and it pays the mortgage. Okay. I mentioned very early on, for those of you who missed it, if you've joined us late, my dad started work at Rover at 15, but around 17 he decided he wanted to be a writer. So he put himself on a touch typing course because he thought that would help him be able to write and produce material quicker. And just earlier today, he found me some of his original books that he bought to help him learn to write. A writer's approach to the novel there, the play, TV and film scripts, short stories, and even newspaper writing. And throughout actually his early 20s, he continued to dabble with this idea of wanting to be a writer. But like I say, then you get married, then you have kids, then you've got a mortgage. And so this dream or inner desire or ambition to be a writer became a more and more distant memory. Yes, Deb, I have done it for him. That's exactly why I've done it. Yeah. Don't make me cry yet. We've got to get to the end. So this got me thinking, this is why then, this is the reason why my dad, a man's man who worked in a factory, who to my mind's #1 passion in life is Aston Villa Football Club, gave me William Wordsworth's collected poems at age 7 and used to randomly recite lines from Wordsworth's I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud. Like I say, the moment he get, yes, Boz, the Villa, I noticed in your bio that you sent me about you being attached to Birmingham City Football Club, and I thought, oh God, God knows what Dad will think of that when he watches the recording. Anyway, so it's that shared love and that shared passion for Wordsworth that I tried to weave into the poems, because as I say, Dad passing that book on to me at age 7 was the catalyst for me wanting to be a poet, wanting to be a writer, developing a love for English and English literature, and has really marked out the path that I've taken in my life. I mentioned this treasured blue book in one of the poems specifically, Binding, but that book is also, that poem, sorry, is also about exploring this sense of duty and how we wrestle with duty in negotiating our identity and experience. And I also tackle those kinds of themes in the poem Composed in My Kitchen Upon the Thought Of, which also mentions my beloved nanny, Dad's mum, Nanny Doris, who, to my mind, had to wrestle with a different type of family duty. So I'm going to read another poem now from the pamphlet. This is Composed in My Kitchen Upon the Thought Of. This thing called duty lives inside, stern, demanding, guiding, reproving. Creates your victories amongst rough rides, terrorizes temptations, attacks erring fears, doubts and calms foreboding fragilities about what might, could be. Although your protective cloak through life, duty wraps you up in love and truth. It cannot set you free, and I wonder whether you found yourself in vacant or pensive mood, watching the other via inward eye, dancing over hills and veiled with the daffodils. Memories of the sea foam emerge on the waves, on the top of the deepest royal blue sea. Wordsworth's words speak to me. You'll never know how much wondering I still do. What I, you, Nanny, might say about memories of her skin, not tissue or crepe, like greaseproof. It had the sound of softness and the wind. I, you, she, long to dance over the hills and vales with the daffodils. Come alive, wondering. I noticed some of you couldn't hear the whispering there, so apologies for that. I have made audio recordings of each of the poems I'm performing tonight, just in case we had any audio hits, problems. So I will make those also available after this evening. So as I say, Dad grew up, he got married, he had kids, he had a mortgage. Did he change? Did the factory change him? Yes, it may have done in some ways, but you can't change the heart of a person. And it was his values, his morals, his passions that stayed the same. And those things that were not only passed on to me and my brother, but also those people who loved and respected him in his factory family. The men really who did look up to Dad, and the people who were so proud of Dad. So of course we as a family were, but his factory family really relied on him as well and saw him as a father figure. Dad had a very ferocious reputation across the whole of the Longbridge factory, apparently, because he didn't suffer fools gladly, and he still likes to remind me about the time they decided to start employing graduates. But apart from that, once people did come to work with Dad, they learned to admire him, adore him, respect his opinion. And as I say, they were very proud to be working alongside him. So the next couple of poems, I hope, integrate some of those themes around what it means to be part of a family made of biological roots, and a family which you choose. Metamorphosis. You were ruled by the track that sliced through the factory, that carved the operating chaos of your life. Me too. By the blood in my arms, the cartographic lines drawn in the grass laid before me. To keep it moving, to keep them and us alive. Hundreds of transposable parts simultaneously dropping into place like dancers. With your eyes shut, counting beats, the rhythm in your fast feet, recognize the tools, the bodies, the faces jacked up the day New West Works opened. When shells swam with robots, then sailed over the Bristol Road. Each day before and after, mechanized, standardized, but you the one-off, driving from one heart, one hearth to another. Daily, nightly dangers posed by predictable assembly sequence, lines forced to refine, whilst you designed me first, yet my parts still coming together, directions in motion, crafting the chaos of the steadfast home that would work us, and the men who remained unchanged for years, the production line that had produced you before. It never stopped. Your brain, like my brain, loudly crashing to the beat of your fast feet, dancing on my heart, growing from the middle. Multiplicities dropping into additional software for brand new computers. Your quick hands, finished processes, same place, same time, every time. The machine making machines work. That conveyor bridge demolished first. Okay, so enough from me for a little bit, and I'm going to introduce Spoz now. So many of you know Spoz, I think. He's an award-winning performance poet, singer-songwriter, filmmaker, playwright, and he's the poet in residence at Birmingham City Football Club. Like I say, the less said about that, the better. Let's not hold that against him. He can often be seen and heard on local and national television and radio, and also performs at festivals around the country. He was Birmingham's Poet Laureate in 2006-07 and continues to work with young people in schools as well as adults. Spoz manages and facilitates many school poetry slam projects across the country, including in the West Midlands, Worcestershire, Herefordshire, Gloucestershire, amongst others. And he has had 3 poetry collections published: The Day the Earth Grew Hair and Spoz's Shorts, the occasional long one, which are both aimed at younger readers, while Sometimes Angry with Verve Poetry Press is aimed at adults and is available at Waterstones. So, Spoz, are you with us?
Hello, can
Hello.
you hear me? Can you hear me, Houston?
Yes.
We all right? How you doing, everyone?
Right.
Oh, Katie, that was lovely, and thanks for the pamphlet.
No problem.
Nice one. Cool. Right. Well, I suppose I'll get on with it, shall I? I'm gonna have to be sort of like taking specs on and off because I'm at that age where I need varifocals, and I just haven't got round to getting them yet. you know, 3 years and all that. It was great you mentioned Gillian, actually. I got the book here.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah, got the book, Making Cars at Longbridge. The weirdest thing, I'm flicking through the book when I got it, and on page 183, right, page 183, there's a photograph, right, there. That's my desk. That's that's my desk in the design office. I used to work in chassis engineering. Chassis. I did a little bit in chassis development, only a little bit. Just after my apprenticeship, I started in September the 8th, 1980. So last week, 40-year anniversary of starting there. And I can still remember when I went out and bought my first pay packet. I went out and bought an electric guitar. I couldn't play. I went out and bought one. I play in a band now. Some say I can't play still, but hey, what the heck. But yeah, it was really weird because that picture there, all the folders. For those of you who don't have the book, Gillian Bardsley and Colin Cork wrote it, Making Cars at Longbridge. That's the one. Get yourselves a copy. But yeah, the picky there. There's all the folders, and there's some engine mounts just casually dropped on the desk there. Those were the bits I was supposed to design, and I know it's my desk because there's the mug there that says, "I'm sorry, you've mistaken me for somebody that gives a shit." Is there? Oh, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still there. I was just trying to make your image bigger so people could see the photograph.
You don't want to do that; it'll scare people. Then we've got the other thing here. If anyone remembers the Wicked Willy cartoons in the 80s, I think it was. Wicked Willy cartoons. When I got married, what they did, they bought me, because I used to wear shorts in the summer, and that was like just not the done thing in an engineering environment. But I was boiling hot, so I thought, you know what, I'm wearing shorts. So they got this Wicked Willy thing here, a foam Wicked Willy, and stuck some shorts on it and gave it to me. But yeah, there's all sorts. That's my desk. And the reason I think they took that photograph, it was obviously when Rover closed, my desk was the first desk you came to as you came in through the main doors. So obviously somebody just ran in with a camera, took a photo and legged it out again. So that's, yeah, my desk in a book, get in. But what really, I mean, so many stories. And Clarissa there just touched on so many commonalities between everyone, so many common threads between us all the little japes and all the horrors as well. I mean, you know, we had, as an apprentice, one of the places we daren't go to was the forge. It was scary. You could feel the earth banging away under your feet. And it was those very forge hammers that I could hear when I was in bed. In St Chad's Road in Rubery on the night shift, you could actually hear the hammers banging away about a mile away. But yeah, the forge was scary, and there was like tales of unfortunate guys who had lost it and stuck their heads under the hammers and stuff like that. You know, I mean, whether it was true or not, this was all the folklore kind of stuff that went round. Yeah, it's a quick way to go though, isn't it? But that's what really got me with the place, with the characters, the people that we worked with. And I suppose I was a bit of an exception. I used to like to go down onto the track. See, when you're wearing your shirt and tie, everyone ripped the piss out of you. Fair enough. And I used to have a mullet. I'm not much better now, to be fair. But I used to have a mullet, and of course, everyone would rip the piss and throw washers at you and stuff. But there are some guys on the track where my components were put together, the engine mounts, and I used to go down and have a chat with the guys, and we'd find out that one of the guys played guitar, and we'd just talk about guitars for ages while the track's going. And he's like on autopilot, going, yeah, drilling, zzz, 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 yeah, I know that, zzz, and all that kind of stuff. It's weird. Anyway, I wrote a poem. I've written several poems about the Rover. Some are quite long, but this one was one that I thought of when I was an apprentice. Another place you hated going through was the sewing shop. Now, I was in South Engineering, and if it was raining, you didn't want to get wet, so you'd walk straight through out of the top of South Engineering, through the sewing shop, through the end of Trentham, up Heart Attack Hill, and into the design office. And of course, a young lad walking through a mainly female environment, you were fresh meat, man. You know, it was like feeding time at the zoo. It really was. So I wrote this called Maeve the Rave. And it starts off as a bit of a character analysis and then just turns into a metaphor for British industry. It goes like this. I can suck a golf ball through a 10-foot length of garden hose, me, said the swarth-complexioned Mavis at the age of 53. She'd been at that machine since her youngest had started school. She was cool, she was fun, she'd take the piss out of anyone. She loved to watch your face fill like a glass jug filling with rosé. Did she care? No way. She'd stitch the seat of many a mini for a guinea an hour. She needed a shower. The aromatic concoction of machine oil and BO could start to overpower you. She was the one that we would cower to, though her intentions were never malicious, because her heart was delicious and good, though her trap was vicious and rude. She was the toppermost bird of the sewing shop brood, but not anymore. Her job had been resourced right out of the Austin. Another reshuffle that her job had been lost in. Streamlining costs. The big boss man said, Boston, that's my bonus sorted this year. And no one fought to save Maeve the Rave. And no one fought to stave off the oncoming wave of cheap import and the choices that gave. And no one fought the big boss man, because the big boss man, he knows that 5 years from now, all this will be retail parks and casinos. And Maeve will be forgotten, her heritage gone, and there'll be only glass buildings where the sun once shone.
Thank you.
But yeah, it's I love talking about the place. 25 years worked there, so thanks for asking me on, Katie.
No problem at all. Thank you so much. I really
pleasure.
appreciate your contribution there. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you. So I think it's time for another contribution now. So I'll introduce Deb. Deb Almer is a UK poet and teacher who has worked for years as a writer in the community. As emergency poet, she administered poetry on prescription from her vintage ambulance. She is editor of Emergency Poet, an anti-stress poetry anthology, #MeToo, Rallying Against Sexual Harassment, a women's poetry anthology, 10 Poems of Happiness, and has recently co-edited These Are the Hands, Poems from the Heart of the NHS. Her first full collection, Dirty Laundry, is published by Nine Artists Press, and she is the co-founder with James Sheard of the Poetry Pharmacy. Hello, Deb, are you with us?
I am. Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Hello. Hello, Spars.
Hello, Deb.
A long time since I've seen you.
Oh, it has been. It's been ages. It's been ages. I'll turn my mic off so I don't butt in. And...
Yeah, it's good. Is it over to me, Katie?
It is over to you now. We're waiting right now.
Right. Well, I'm not very good at being formal, right? So I'll just sort of wave my hands about and chat. But I think, Katie, you sent me a copy of the pamphlet for the poetry library here at the Poetry Pharmacy, which is behind me. And I said, oh, I'm really just kindly because we're friends. And I said, oh, I was married to the Rover for 17 years. And I think it was a surprise for you, wasn't it?
It was.
I had that connection because you wouldn't imagine that I had. Yeah, in my mid-20s, I met Andrew Kitson. You remember Andrew Spars? Yeah, and I met him. He was at the time an apprentice, and Rover sponsored him to do a degree in engineering, and then he worked and basically he started as an apprentice and he ended up as head of chassis development, so quite a career, and he did really well there. So I kind of, from my mid-20s, I grew up with this vocabulary of being able to assess the ride and handling and the primary and secondary ride of all sorts of cars. And he'd come back in competitor cars, so I got a chance to drive a Lotus Exige and Porsches and all sorts of flash cars. And sometimes I'd take the children to school in them, which was always a bit embarrassing because they thought you were loaded. But anyway, yeah, and so the Longbridge plant is really important to me. And when I was reading your poems, I found it really, it made me cry a lot because it was I knew Sport actually before he and I were poets, so we knew each other because of Longbridge. And I can remember when Sport left to become a professional poet, and everybody what the hell are you doing? And yeah, I remember going to the flight shed where Andrew worked late at night to pick up something or something he'd left behind, and the rats running around. Can you remember the rats later? Yeah, it was on the site. And that flood of, I mean, you talked about the machine shop or whatever with all those women, but when you're a woman and you go in there, my God, it's a town of men, you know, and it was quite exciting when you were young. It's like all these men. And it was just, there were just, like Spos was saying, a cast of characters, people that were good friends of mine. So, and I miss them now. And the poem I've asked Katie if she'll read is actually quite a sad one for me, because I said I was married to Longbridge, and for me, because Andrew had this career and he became a manager of people, he had to get there before anybody else was there and leave after everybody else, and he had a strong sense of duty and commitment. So I remember once he was doing a test drive and he rolled a car, I think it was a Range Rover, over a barrier and cut his head right to the bone in this horrible accident. Came back and he got up to go to work the next day, you know, stitches in his head, concussion, and he had this kind of, I have to go. And partly his marriage to the Rover was part of why our relationship failed. You know, he was there and I was at home. So I wonder if you'd read your poem, which when I read to my son actually made me cry, called Growing Pains.
Thank you, Deb. Yeah, thank you. So much of that, what you've both just said, has touched me again, because it brings back so much more stuff that Dad told me. And obviously I couldn't get it all in a pamphlet. So Dad's already asking me for volume 2.
Right, as well.
You know, my dad suffered with his legs and had to have leg surgery, and he said to us, you know, you went into hospital the one day, had the surgery, and you were back at the factory the next day, and that was it.
Yeah.
So, thank you very much for that, Deb. Thank you. And yes, I will read Growing Pains now. I feel like you fell in love with the factory, and that you are the romantic in the relationship. You tell me about a lovely little job in a caravan, you wandering around Longbridge, looking for cars on a computerized list, and when you found it, you drove it and nobody bothered. You tell me about the time you went to help the gaffer in the painted body store because the supervisors couldn't cope and production managers would stop the track, and plant directors and manufacturing directors would sit there watching. One got a red phone that would only ring out, and when it rang, people screamed. You answered. You say you went because of the mortgage and the kids, and no one had ever been fast-tracked before. You became that good that no one else wanted it. So you couldn't move. You didn't move. Thank you. Thanks. I'm just going to share some more photos with you now. Thank you. Okay, so hopefully you can see those photos now. Oh, well, I've just noticed, Clarissa, that you're here. Your video was brilliant. I mean, I've listened to it loads of times, but I think that really helped give a sense of what I was trying to capture. It was so good to hear from you. Thank you for your video. So I think it's evident that over its nearly 100-year history, Longbridge, the car factory, had lots of ups and downs, lots of highs and lows, and this roller coaster ride was really felt by the people of the plant. Oh yeah, sorry, I'll just pause there because I've noticed in the chat that Spoz wanted me to read Terrible Really. So I'll pause and I'll read that first. Can't remember what page it's on. Thank you. People know my pamphlet better than me. So again, this was a poem that really was about trying to capture the family life of working in a factory, and my dad as the father figure. They were bloodying fists all the time. You kept your cool, though your heart was still beating all the time. You were all fighting. People wouldn't cope today. They'd crack up. There one day and then gone to the funny farm. You never thought. You never talked. But the pressure. Blokes did crack. Blokes didn't cope. Your bloodied heart kept beating. You were all fighting. Never talked. Dog eat dog. You admit you ate anyone because you wouldn't go under or take the flak. You had to keep fighting. The pressure. You couldn't go under. It wasn't all doom and gloom. The Olympics, arts and cricket in the summer, like the Wolf of Wall Street. You had men on your coattails. One day a bloke, a good bloke with only one son, came to you and said he needed to leave. He needed to get to Hillsborough. He needed to try and find his son at Hillsborough. He came back, but his son, you didn't let him crack. You didn't let him go under. You wouldn't eat him. Your bloodied heart didn't mind when he cried. For a time, it beat and bled for both of you. I'm so glad that you reminded me to read that poem, because that is one of my favourites from the pamphlet, because my most iconic memory of all of Dad's stories was the story of him telling us about almost counselling this bloke, his work colleague, through the loss of his only son at Hillsborough. And it really did touch me, and still to this day really does touch me and brings a lump to my throat. You know, factory life, factories weren't a place to show emotions. You're not supposed to be weak in a factory. As Deb was saying, very much was a man's world. And it also meant so much to me to hear that the only person this guy thought he could confide in was my dad. And that's really what makes me emotional. because that says a lot about who my dad is. And although he put on a very strong, aggressive, masculine front in the factory, he's actually a very sensitive, kind and quiet man. Okay, so before we had the emotional moment, I was just going to talk, and you know, this is going to set me off now because I'm just about to talk about loss and closure, and I'm already on the verge of tears, so please do bear with me if I start to cry. So as I say, over its nearly 100-year history, it had a lot of ups and downs, and we really felt it. You know, Clarissa spoke about her family going on a march in 2000. We as a family thought the factory was going to close then, and you gear up for it and you prepare yourself for closure, and woohoo, it suddenly reignited itself, and it managed to last another 5 years. So in 2005, even when they locked the gates, the day they locked the gates, we still didn't know whether to fully believe that it was truly over. And in fact, there were empty car shells left in mid-flight in the production line, and that image became a famous image at the time in 2005 in the local media when discussing the closure of the factory. Well, the reason those empty shells were left in mid-flight was because those men, when they downed tools and stepped away from the track, honestly thought that their job was still going to be there. You know, that they thought they were coming back in the near future to restart that track. And the media might have used that as an image to signify the men's naivety. But for me, that is a very iconic image which demonstrates the sense of duty, loyalty, commitment, the blood, the factory blood that was running through those men's veins. And that's why I included the poem Empty Shells in the collection. When we realised that this was going to be closed for good, and that was the end, so to speak, and we were watching news reports, and we started to realise, no, actually, there is no coming back from this. You know, I got upset, but I never once saw my dad shed a tear. And I'm so proud of the way that he handled the closure of that factory still to this day, because that was 36 years of his life. That was the only life that he had known from age 15. And he never once showed me any sadness or any weakness, not because he probably didn't feel that, but because he didn't want to make me feel insecure and unstable. At the time of the closure, I was only in the second year of my undergraduate degree. My dad knew how important that degree was for me. And there was a moment in time where my future on the course was hanging in the balance because the student loans company couldn't get the right paperwork from the closed factory to prove that my dad didn't have a job. So they were saying they weren't going to support me. And so I think that was another reason why Dad felt it was important to kind of put on this brave face, because he wanted me to believe, and he wanted my brother to believe, that it was all going to be okay. And, you know, as we came to terms with things, and as the months went on, Dad gave his car back to Rover, but he bought my car and said he would share my car. My dad wasn't going to share my car. I was driving to Worcester every day. I was driving to Worcester on weekends even, and staying overnight to have house parties and stuff. And if I wasn't in Worcester, I was up Merry Hill working in a shop. So how was Dad going to share my car? So that was another sacrifice that he made for me. Like I say, my dad had worked there 36 years, had worked his way up from an apprentice, had a really important job with a lot of significant responsibility, managed a lot of people, but he had nothing to show for it. You know, he had no formal qualifications. So had to develop a CV for him. He'd never written a CV before in his life. He didn't really know what one was. And eventually he managed to get a job at Sainsbury's on the night shift, stacking shelves. So I'm going to read the poem now that's called Thursday the 7th of April 2005, which is about the day the gates closed. After World War I and II, the Depression, the strikes, the foreign market boom, the Mini, the Metro, the Austin Allegro, the mergers, the takeovers, the share drops, all the faces, the bodies, the tools gone. The darkest day. Gloom spread its plumage beyond Longbridge borders. The world fell in its nest. 5 years, 14 years, 25 years, 36 years and 2 minutes in the Dole office feeling 2 inches tall. Just bear with it. Good will come in the shape of Sainsbury's and the eternal night shift that no one wants, stacking stinking pet food and pop. Like a slow motion crash that kept on crashing even after the kids' day out to see Blair, and PricewaterhouseCoopers with their paperwork and no remit and the 3 p.m. locking of the gates. When feathers glued together with a tenor started rustling about pensions, wings folded, and everyone hoped the life-saving deal might still go ahead. Regardless of niceties, ITV Central News told us it was over, and Rohit Katru said the facts were plain. 100-year history, no party. Hewitt MP was teary. Palpable, appalling anxiety of the forthcoming election, probably. Huddled under the magnificent phoenix, we shielded from freezing winds and flurries of snow. It sung about good business logic, and let's not set hopes flying, but there'd be a fight. The scraps kept us singing. Powell was approached by a certain number of people, a bid from a private consortium, and he'd be delighted to hear from more. Any company would be glad to have workforce such as that. Suffocated whilst waiting for the golden egg. The bird wouldn't rise again. £10 million here, £40 million there, task forces, hotlines, training, regeneration zones, CV creators, support packages. Rover sneezed and was gone. Okay, so thank you. So it was strange to hear about the factory site being regenerated when we saw the factory buildings being demolished. And as I mentioned very early on, thank you everyone, thank you for your appreciation there. It's so weird, isn't it, not be able to be in the same environment as each other and get a sense of atmosphere. So as I mentioned very early on, I found it very difficult to read the regeneration and marketing materials of St Modwin, just because I felt like it was so cold, it was so heartless. They made it sound like Longbridge had been crying out for regeneration, that this is what the town deserved. Well, what about the community that felt such a sense of pride and love and heart for that factory? It was part of their identity, it was part of Dad's identity, it was part of our family identity. And that is what I've tried to draw upon in those poems in the pamphlet that use those found elements from the marketing material. Yes, St Modwin have created a lovely leisure shopping zone, but I didn't want that social and personal history to be erased. And I'm sure all those other people and families and generations of families who had been touched by the factory also wanted those memories to be recorded or captured in some way. And to St Modwen's credit, they have tried to do that. If you travel around the regenerated Longbridge town centre, you'll see on the walls these little red placards, and they're QR codes, and you can stand next to them with your smartphone and scan the QR code, and it gives you a tiny little snippet of factory history. What it doesn't give you are all those very special memories, stories, anecdotes and experiences, some of which we've heard tonight, not just from me, but from Clarissa, from Deb, from Sparks. What those QR codes can't communicate is the heart, the soul of that factory. And so I guess in those poems called The Heart and called The Grand Plan, I am being quite ironic there with the use of the St Modwen material and juxtaposing it next to what I hope is quite a sincere passion and still feeling of love and admiration for the place that has afforded me the life that I have now. Which brings me full circle to talk about my family today. Would you believe that the Longbridge Marks and Spencer's #1 fan is actually my mum? She loves Marks and Spencer's, and she loves that Marks and Spencer's, right? So we still go there quite often, just so mum can go to M&S. Obviously, I've grown up. I'm no longer living at home, although I will tell you, I am live casting this evening from my childhood home, and mum and dad are upstairs. I just thought that would be quite special for this evening. So we often walk around New Longbridge, and I take my children with us now. And I thought it was important to try and capture a sense of us keeping those stories and those memories alive through my children, and that is why my son Alistair is on the front of the pamphlet. So what you're seeing there is the original photo. That is the photo that Ruth has edited and put on the front of the pamphlet. Okay, so my grandfather worked at the factory, his grandfather worked at the factory, and my little boy's first word, believe it or not, was car. And he's absolutely amazed by the fact that his granddad used to build cars. And when we take him to the town centre and walk him round and we say, what used to be here? He goes, a factory. Granddad used to make cars here. So he knows, and I think that's very important. And I thought I'd give you an update on what Dad's doing now, considering you've heard his entire life story. You know, 36 years at Longbridge, then he spent some time working at Sainsbury's. So where is Derek Wareham now? Well, Derek Wareham now is currently employed by Katie Wareham Morris as her personal assistant, because the guy continues to make the ultimate sacrifice, as does my mother, for me, in the fact that he gave up his very glamorous job at Sainsbury's to look after my children full time. And mum and dad do my cleaning, they do my shopping, and they do my washing. They do everything to make, yes, Deb, I can see your face there. They do everything for me to make the life that I chose possible, because there is no way that I could be pursuing this career without their support and everything they do for me. And I really can't thank them enough for that. I mean, can you imagine trying to tell your mum and dad as well that you want to be a poet and an academic? I mean, that's a struggle. So they're helping me without even really understanding what it is that I do. And I'm eternally grateful to them. And I hope this poetry pamphlet goes some way to showing my appreciation for them and everything that they continue to do for me and my brother and for my children and family. So that's it from me, really. thank you once again to Spaz and Deb for your live contributions tonight. I've really appreciated it. Thank you once again to Clarissa for your fantastic video. Thank you to everyone who supported me by coming tonight and who continues to support me, including my husband Simon, if you're still there. And obviously, thank you to Sarah once again for trusting me with these poems and for publishing them. And if you haven't already got a copy, you can get one direct from the Bee Press website, or if you want a yes, Daddy D's the best, I've just seen that comment, or if you want a signed copy from me, just let me know. But that's it from me. Feel free, if you want to unmute yourselves or turn your camera on if you want to ask me anything or say anything, or we can continue in the chat. But you know, I've had you here for a good hour and a half now, so please do feel free to leave if you need to. I really appreciate your time this evening. Thank you.
Katie, that was brilliant. Thank you so
Yes,
much.
Deb, I still have the Wordsworth. I still have the Wordsworth, and in fact, that collection of poetry is so significant to my life. I hadn't realised how much I talk about it, but I must do, because Simon realised how important it was to me. And for our first wedding anniversary, which I think is paper, he bought me another vintage copy of that Wordsworth collected poems.
Oh, lovely.
Yay. No, it was a lovely evening. Thanks ever such a lot for having us. And Deb, oh man, I mentioned, you know, you were talking about competitor vehicles. Well,
Yeah.
I managed to trash a BMW. I rolled it, and who came out to pick it up with the Land Rover and the trailer? Oh, it was Andy.
Yeah. Lovely to see you, Spaz.
Lovely to see you all as well, and you, Deb, and everyone else. Blessings, everyone. Take care. I'm going to make a cup of tea, and I'll see you later.
Right.
Thank
See
you. Thanks. Thanks for coming. Thank you. I don't know if Dad will take up writing again, to be honest. I did ask him tonight, you know, to play a little part in this. But again, I think I mentioned earlier, you know, that deep down, Daddy's actually very shy and sensitive. And like, he was like, no, it's your night, it's your night. So he's just going to watch the recording. But I do try and encourage him to write poetry, actually, because, you know, he had a very interesting perception of what poetry was. You know, if you can imagine a man who loved Wordsworth, but never thought he had the education or capabilities to write something similar, and only knowing that as poetry, I've tried to show him what poetry can be in all its various different styles and forms, and actually he really enjoys Spazzy's work. He actually really enjoys performance poetry. He's a real big fan of John Cooper Clarke, and so I'm trying to encourage Dad to write poetry in his own voice, you know. Write it as you feel it, as you experience it, not because you think that's what poetry is. So maybe if he ever has time, exactly, Jack, spoken word, yeah. If he ever had time, he'd say he probably doesn't have time to write poetry because he's working more hours working for me than he ever did in the factory. Cheeky Dick. No problem. Thank you all for coming. Anybody else got anything they want to say or ask me or anything?
Just thanks for a great evening, Katie.
Oh, Sharon, thank you. Thanks for coming.
Right. That's all right. Nick, I managed to get Nick to do the washing up, so it's been good.
Oh, super. Absolutely super. Bye, Deb.
Bye. It's been great. Really great.
Oh, thank
Bye,
you.
Katie. Bye.
Bye, bye.
Hi, Katie. Just wanted to say well done.
Oh, hi, Lucy. Thank you so much. Lovely to see your face. Thank you so much.
And you.
Thank
I think
you.
you made your dad well proud.
Oh, thanks. I hope so. Yeah, hope so.
Right. Take care.
Bye, love. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Bye. Anyone else? I'll wait till the last few people go. Hello? Who's
Hello.
on their microphone? Hello. Hello, husband.
Well done.
Thank you.
I think it's only me, my mum, and Thomas left.